The family laughed when the veteran inherited a rotting warehouse until the dog found the hidden tunnel. You're about to discover an incredible story that will leave you speechless. Today, we're bringing you the remarkable tale of a veteran whose life changed forever when his dog made an unthinkable discovery. If this story moves you like it moved us, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss our amazing stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let's dive into this extraordinary journey. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the small diner in Cedar Falls, Iowa, as Marcus Rodriguez stared at the legal documents spread across the worn Formica table. At 34, the former Army sergeant had seen enough of the world to know when something seemed too good to be true. And right now, staring at the inheritance papers from his great-uncle Edmund, everything felt surreal. "You sure about this, Mr. Rodriguez?" asked Janet Patterson, the family attorney who had driven 2 hours from Des Moines to meet him. Her kind eyes reflected both sympathy and curiosity. "Your great-uncle was quite specific in his will. The warehouse and all its contents go to you, along with a small monthly stipend from his estate." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache that had plagued him since his last deployment in Afghanistan. 3 years had passed since he'd returned home, and he was still adjusting to civilian life. His disability pension barely covered rent for his tiny apartment above Murphy's hardware store, and his part-time work at the Veterans Center didn't leave much room for luxuries. "I barely knew Uncle Edmund," Marcus admitted, his voice carrying the slight rasp that came from too many years of desert sand and stress. "Saw him maybe 3 times at family reunions when I was a kid. Why would he leave me anything?" Janet leaned forward, her voice gentle but professional. "According to his notes, he was proud of your service. He never married, had no children, and felt a connection to your military background. He served in Vietnam, you know." Marcus hadn't known that. His family wasn't big on sharing war stories, or much of anything else for that matter. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 22, just before his second deployment, and his extended family had always treated him like an obligation rather than a relative. "What's the catch?" Marcus asked, eyeing the thick stack of papers. "No catch, legally speaking, but I should warn you, the property hasn't been maintained in years. It's a large warehouse on the outskirts of town, built sometime in the 1940s. Your uncle bought it in the late 70s, but according to local records, he rarely visited. The building is, well, it's in rough condition." Marcus thought about his current living situation. His studio apartment was barely 400 square feet, with paper-thin walls, and a landlord who acted like basic maintenance was a personal favor. Even a run-down warehouse had to be better than that. "When can I see it?" he asked. Janet smiled, clearly relieved that he wasn't going to make her job difficult. "How about tomorrow morning? I have the keys right here." The next day dawned gray and drizzly, typical for Iowa in late October. Marcus borrowed his neighbor's pickup truck, a 1998 Ford that had seen better decades, and followed Janet's sleek sedan down a series of increasingly rural roads. The warehouse sat on nearly 5 acres of overgrown land, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese. Marcus's first glimpse of his inheritance made his stomach drop. The building was massive, maybe 60,000 square feet, but it looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. The metal siding was streaked with rust, several windows were boarded up, and weeds grew so high around the foundation that they nearly reached the roofline. "Jesus," Marcus muttered, climbing out of the truck. "It's structurally sound," Janet said quickly, clearly trying to put a positive spin on things. "I had it inspected last month. The roof needs some work, and there are electrical issues, but the foundation and frame are solid." They pushed through the overgrown grass to reach the main entrance. The heavy steel door groaned in protest as Janet turned the key, and Marcus caught a whiff of musty air mixed with something else, Motor oil, maybe, and something metallic he couldn't quite identify. The interior was cavernous and dark. Janet found a working light switch, and a handful of fluorescent fixtures flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The space was largely empty, except for some scattered debris, old pallets, and what looked like the remnants of some kind of workshop in one corner. "Your uncle used to restore classic cars," Janet explained, noticing Marcus's gaze. "According to the neighbors, he was quite skilled at it, though he became more reclusive over the years." Marcus walked deeper into the warehouse, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Despite its condition, he could see the potential. With some work, this could be amazing. He could set up a proper workshop, maybe even start the motorcycle repair business he'd always dreamed about. "There's also this," Janet said, leading him to a small office area that had been built into one corner of the warehouse. It was spartanly furnished with a desk, filing cabinet, and a narrow bed. "Your uncle sometimes stayed here when he was working on projects." The office was cleaner than the main warehouse, though still covered in dust. On the desk, Marcus found a stack of automotive magazines from the 1980s and a coffee mug with "World's Greatest Uncle" printed on the side. Despite himself, Marcus felt a pang of sadness for this man he'd barely known. "I think I'll take it," Marcus said finally. Janet looked relieved. "Wonderful. There are just a few more papers to sign, and then it's all yours." 2 weeks later, Marcus had moved his few possessions into the warehouse office. It wasn't much: a duffel bag of clothes, some books, his old military footlocker, and a photograph of his parents. But it was more space than he'd had in years. He'd spent his first few days cleaning out debris and getting the electricity working properly throughout the building. The warehouse felt less lonely than his apartment had, despite its size. There was something comforting about the high ceilings and the way sound carried through the space. He'd set up his coffee maker on a workbench near the office and had started making plans for renovations he couldn't afford yet. On a particularly cold Thursday morning in November, as Marcus was trying to fix a leaky pipe in what passed for a bathroom, he heard a scratching at the main door. When he opened it, he found a medium-sized dog sitting patiently on the concrete step. The dog was clearly a mixed breed, part German Shepherd, part something else entirely. His coat was thick and golden brown, with distinctive black markings around his ears and muzzle. He looked well-fed but tired, as if he'd been traveling for a while. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus said softly, crouching down. The dog's tail wagged tentatively, and he took a step closer. "You lost?" Marcus looked around for any sign of the dog's owner, but the warehouse was isolated, surrounded by empty fields and the occasional farmhouse in the distance. The nearest neighbor was at least a half-mile away. The dog seemed friendly enough, so Marcus let him into the warehouse. He found an old bowl and filled it with water, which the dog drank gratefully. Then he drove to the nearest store and bought a bag of dog food, telling himself it was just temporary until he could find the animal's real home. He put up flyers around town, found "Dog, call Marcus," and posted on local Facebook groups, but no one claimed the animal. After a week, Marcus found himself getting attached. The dog was excellent company, seemed well-trained, and had a calm intelligence that reminded Marcus of some of the military working dogs he'd known overseas. "Guess you need a name," Marcus said one evening, as they shared a dinner of take-out Chinese food and dog kibble. The dog was sitting beside Marcus's makeshift dining table, watching him with alert brown eyes. "How about Scout? You seem like a scout." The dog's tail wagged, which Marcus took as approval. Scout quickly became Marcus's shadow, following him around the warehouse as he worked on small repairs and improvements. The dog seemed particularly fascinated by the main warehouse floor, often sniffing at certain areas and whining softly. Marcus assumed he was picking up scents from the building's automotive history, oil stains, metal filings, that sort of thing. It was Scout who first noticed the anomaly. On a Saturday morning in early December, as Marcus was trying to install better lighting in the workshop area, Scout began pawing at a specific section of the concrete floor. The dog was unusually persistent, whining and scratching until Marcus came over to investigate. "What is it, boy?" Marcus knelt down and examined the area. At first glance, it looked like the rest of the floor, grey concrete with various stains and scratches from decades of use. But as he looked more closely, he noticed something odd. There was a subtle rectangular outline in the concrete, maybe 4 feet by 6 feet, that was slightly different in color and texture from the surrounding floor. It was barely visible unless you were looking for it, and even then you might dismiss it as just another repair patch. Marcus ran his fingers along the edges of the rectangle. The concrete here felt different, newer somehow, despite being obviously old. He tapped it with his knuckles and heard a slightly hollow sound. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. He spent the next hour examining the area more carefully. The rectangular section was definitely a patch, but it had been done with incredible skill. Someone had taken great care to make it blend with the original floor. Marcus went to the small collection of tools he'd inherited with the warehouse and found a heavy-duty chisel and sledgehammer. If there was something under this patch, he was going to find out what it was. The concrete was thick, at least 6 inches, and it took him most of the afternoon to break through. Scout watched the entire process, occasionally barking encouragement or warning Marcus when larger chunks of concrete were about to fall. When Marcus finally broke through, he found himself staring into a rectangular opening that descended into darkness. The opening was lined with what looked like wooden frames, and there was a metal ladder attached to one side. "Holy shit," Marcus breathed. He found a flashlight and shined it down into the hole. The ladder descended about 8 feet to what appeared to be the floor of a tunnel or underground room. The air that drifted up was stale, but not unpleasant, dry, with a faint metallic smell. Marcus looked at Scout, who was staring down into the opening with intense interest. "Well, boy, what do you think? Should we take a look?" Scout barked once, as if to say, "Absolutely." Marcus tested the ladder, it seemed sturdy enough, and slowly climbed down into the underground space. Scout waited at the top, whining softly with concern. The flashlight revealed a narrow tunnel that stretched away from the ladder in both directions. The walls were lined with wood planks, and the floor was hard-packed earth. It was clearly hand-dug, and Marcus could see tool marks in the earthen walls. This wasn't some natural cave or old foundation. Someone had deliberately excavated this tunnel. "Marcus!" Scout's bark echoed from above, and Marcus realized he'd been down there for several minutes without making a sound. "I'm okay, boy," he called up, "just trying to figure out what the hell this is." Marcus chose to explore the tunnel branch that headed toward the back of the warehouse. The passage was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, and just tall enough for him to walk upright. Every 20 feet or so, wooden support beams had been installed to prevent cave-ins. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a small underground room, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, and what Marcus found there made his jaw drop. The room was filled with wooden crates, metal boxes, and what appeared to be pieces of machinery, all carefully organized and covered with canvas tarps. Marcus lifted one of the tarps and found himself staring at what looked like printing equipment, but not the kind used for newspapers or books. His military experience kicked in, and Marcus immediately recognized some of the equipment. This was currency printing machinery, the kind used to produce high-quality counterfeit bills, but it was old, probably from the 1970s or 1980s, based on the technology. In one corner of the room, Marcus found a metal filing cabinet. Inside, he discovered folders full of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be samples of counterfeit currency. But these weren't ordinary counterfeits. The quality was extraordinary, almost indistinguishable from real bills. As Marcus examined the documents more carefully, a picture began to emerge. His great-uncle Edmund hadn't just been a car mechanic. According to the papers, He'd been part of a sophisticated counterfeiting operation that had run for over a decade, producing millions of dollars in fake currency. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, Marcus found a leather journal filled with Edmund's handwriting. The entries dated back to 1978 and continued through the mid-1990s. As Marcus read, he realized that his uncle hadn't been a criminal mastermind. He'd been working with the federal government. Operation Greenback, Marcus read aloud in the empty underground room. Controlled counterfeiting operation designed to track and identify foreign counterfeit networks. All activities authorized under Federal Bureau of Investigation oversight. Edmund had been an undercover asset, using his legitimate car restoration business as cover while producing high-quality counterfeit currency that could be tracked and traced back to foreign criminal organizations. The operation had been incredibly successful, leading to the arrest of hundreds of international counterfeiters and the disruption of several major criminal networks. Marcus found letters of commendation from FBI directors, records of payments for services rendered, and detailed reports on various operations Edmund had participated in. The man his family had dismissed as a reclusive car mechanic had actually been a patriot who had spent decades serving his country in a way that could never be publicly acknowledged. But there was more. The journal entries from the 1990s told a different story. Edmund had grown increasingly concerned about the security of the operation. Several of his fellow assets had been compromised, and there were signs that foreign intelligence services were closing in on the network. In 1994, the FBI had officially shut down Operation Greenback and ordered all equipment and materials destroyed. But Edmund hadn't destroyed everything. "I can't bring myself to destroy it all," one journal entry read. "This equipment, these records, they represent 20 years of my life, 20 years of service that no one will ever know about. If something happens to me, if someone tries to claim I was a criminal, this is proof that I served my country honorably." Marcus sat in the underground room for a long time, absorbing what he'd learned. His great-uncle had been a hero, not a criminal, and he'd hidden this secret for decades to protect not just himself, but the ongoing security of federal operations. But the discovery raised a troubling question. What was Marcus supposed to do with all of this? He climbed back up to the warehouse floor, where Scout was waiting anxiously. The dog immediately began checking Marcus over, as if to make sure he was unharmed. "It's okay, boy," Marcus said, scratching behind Scout's ears. "But we've got a problem. A big problem." Over the next few days, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the underground room and its contents. He researched Operation Greenback online, but found only vague references to counterfeiting investigations from that era. The operation had been so classified that even decades later, most details remained secret. Marcus considered his options. He could contact the FBI and turn everything over, but he worried about how they might react. Would they believe that Edmund had been authorized to keep this equipment? Would they assume Marcus was involved in some kind of criminal activity? Given his financial situation and the fact that he was living in a warehouse, he could easily be painted as desperate enough to get involved in counterfeiting. On the other hand, keeping quiet felt wrong. This wasn't just about Edmund's legacy. There was sophisticated criminal equipment sitting under Marcus's property, and that had to violate federal laws. While Marcus wrestled with these questions, Scout continued to be fascinated by the tunnel entrance. Even with the concrete patch temporarily covered by a tarp, the dog would often sit by the spot and whine softly, as if he knew there was more to discover. It was Scout's persistence that led to the next major discovery. On a Friday evening in mid-December, as Marcus was reviewing Edmund's journal entries for the 100th time, Scout began barking at the tunnel entrance with unusual urgency. When Marcus went to investigate, he found the dog pawing at the tarp and whining. "What is it, Scout?" "We've already been down there," but Scout was insistent, running back and forth between Marcus and the entrance. Finally, Marcus gave in and climbed back down into the tunnel. This time, instead of heading toward the room with the counterfeiting equipment, Marcus explored the other branch of the tunnel. This passage was narrower and seemed older, with rougher wooden supports and more primitive construction. After about 30 yards, this branch of the tunnel ended at what appeared to be a solid earthen wall. But as Marcus examined it more closely with his flashlight, he noticed that the wall was actually a carefully constructed false barrier, designed to look like a natural dead end. It took him almost an hour to carefully dismantle the false wall, working by flashlight in the cramped tunnel. But when he finally broke through, Marcus found himself staring at something that made the counterfeiting equipment seem insignificant by comparison. The hidden chamber beyond the false wall was larger than the first room, maybe 15 feet square, and it was filled with military equipment, but not just any military equipment. This was advanced gear that Marcus recognized from his time in special operations: night vision equipment, encrypted communication devices, weapons, and what appeared to be explosives. But it was the documents in this room that truly stunned Marcus. Filed in waterproof containers, he found records of Operation North Wind, a classified mission that had taken place in 1979. According to the documents, Edmund hadn't just been involved in counterfeiting operations. He'd been a deep-cover asset working to infiltrate Soviet intelligence networks that were operating on American soil. The weapons and equipment in the hidden chamber had been pre-positioned for use in case Edmund's cover was blown and he needed to either escape or defend himself. The operation had been so sensitive that even the FBI counterfeiting work had been secondary cover for Edmund's real mission. Marcus found letters from CIA officials, coded communication instructions, and detailed intelligence reports on Soviet activities in the Midwest during the late Cold War period. Edmund had been documenting and reporting on a network of foreign agents that had been operating farms and rural businesses as cover for intelligence gathering and potential sabotage activities. But the most shocking document was a letter dated 1995, 5 years before Edmund's death. In it, a CIA official thanked Edmund for his decades of service and informed him that his mission was officially complete. The Soviet networks had been neutralized, and Edmund was free to retire from active service. However, the letter also contained a warning. "Due to the sensitive nature of your work, we recommend that you maintain operational security for the remainder of your life. There may still be individuals who would seek revenge if they discovered your true role in these operations." Marcus sat in the hidden chamber, surrounded by the tools and weapons of a secret war that most Americans never knew had been fought on their own soil. His great-uncle hadn't just been a hero, he'd been a spy, a patriot who had spent decades protecting his country from foreign threats. But now Marcus faced an even more complicated situation. This wasn't just about counterfeiting equipment anymore. This was about classified intelligence operations that might still be sensitive, even after all these years. When Marcus climbed back up to the warehouse floor, he found Scout waiting patiently by the entrance. The dog seemed calmer now, as if he understood that the important discoveries had been made. "What do you think, boy?" Marcus asked, sitting down on the floor beside Scout. "What would Uncle Edmund want me to do?" Scout looked at Marcus with those intelligent brown eyes and then walked over to the small office area where Marcus had found the coffee mug with "World's Greatest Uncle" printed on it. The dog sat down next to the desk and barked once. Marcus followed Scout to the office and began searching through the desk drawers more carefully than he had when he first moved in. In the bottom drawer, hidden behind some old files, he found an envelope with his name written on it in Edmund's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter dated just 6 months before Edmund's death. "Marcus, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've found at least some of what I left hidden in the warehouse. I hope Scout found you. I trained him to help anyone who inherited this place from me. Yes, Scout was my dog. I arranged for him to be cared for by a family in town after my death, but I knew he would eventually make his way back here when the right person arrived. Dogs have a sense about these things that we humans often lack. You're probably confused and maybe frightened by what you've discovered. You have every right to be. What I did for our country was necessary, but it was also dangerous, and that danger may not be completely over. I chose you as my heir because I believe you have the character and judgment to handle this responsibility. Your military service tells me you understand duty, honor, and the sometimes difficult choices that patriots must make. You have 3 options. 1. You can contact the FBI field office in Des Moines and turn everything over to them. They will handle the situation professionally, and you will be compensated for your cooperation. However, you should know that this may result in significant government scrutiny of your life for years to come. 2. You can contact the CIA through the number I've written on the back of this letter. They will be very interested in recovering the materials from Operation Northwind, and they will ensure that you are well compensated and protected. 3. You can choose to continue the family tradition of service. If you choose the 3rd option, you should know that there is still work to be done. The Cold War may be over, but new threats have emerged. Our country needs patriots who can work in the shadows to protect American interests. The choice is yours, Marcus. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud to call you family, and I trust your judgment. Your uncle, Edmund Rodriguez, P.S. There's one more thing hidden in the warehouse, but Scout will have to show you where it is when you're ready. Marcus read the letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. Edmund hadn't just left him property and equipment. He'd left him a choice about whether to continue a legacy of secret service to his country. He looked at Scout, who was watching him with what seemed like understanding. "So you were his partner, weren't you, boy? You've been waiting for me to figure all this out." Scout's tail wagged, and he walked back toward the main warehouse floor. But instead of heading to the tunnel entrance, the dog went to a section of wall that Marcus had assumed was just part of the building's structure. Following Scout, Marcus examined the wall more carefully. It appeared to be a standard concrete block wall, but as he ran his hands along it, he found a section where the mortar was slightly different in color. When he pressed on one particular block, it shifted slightly. It took Marcus several minutes to figure out the mechanism, but eventually he discovered that a section of the wall could be rotated on a hidden pivot, revealing another hidden room. This final chamber was smaller than the others, but contained the most valuable discovery yet: gold bars, bundled cash, and investment documents showing that Edmund had accumulated a substantial fortune during his years of government service. A note attached to one of the gold bars explained, "Payment for services rendered, 1978-1995. Interest and investment gains through 2000. Current estimated value, $2.8 million. Marcus sat down hard on the floor of the hidden chamber. In the space of a week, he'd gone from being a struggling veteran living paycheck to being the heir to a multi-million-dollar fortune and the keeper of some of the most sensitive secrets in American intelligence history. But more than that, he'd discovered that he came from a family with a proud tradition of service, even if that service had to remain secret. Over the next few days, Marcus thought carefully about his 3 options. The easy choice would be to turn everything over to the FBI or CIA, take whatever money they offered, and try to return to a normal life. But the more he learned about Edmund's work, the more he understood that normal might not be possible anymore. Marcus spent hours reading through Edmund's intelligence reports and journals. The picture that emerged was of a man who had genuinely loved his country and had been willing to sacrifice everything, including the chance to have a normal family life, to protect American interests. But Edmund's work hadn't ended with the fall of the Soviet Union. His later reports documented emerging threats, international criminal organizations, terrorist financing networks, and foreign intelligence services that continued to operate on American soil. In his final journal entries, Edmund had expressed frustration that his advancing age prevented him from continuing active operations, but he'd also noted several ongoing investigations that needed attention. "Someone needs to continue this work," one entry read. "The threats are evolving, but they haven't disappeared. America needs guardians who can operate in the shadows, people who understand that freedom isn't free and that sometimes the price must be paid in ways the public can never know about." On Christmas Eve, as snow fell outside the warehouse and Scout dozed by the small space heater Marcus had bought, Marcus made his decision. He walked to the payphone outside the local diner and dialed the number Edmund had written on the back of the letter. After several transfers and security questions, he found himself speaking to a man who identified himself only as Mr. Thompson. "Mr. Rodriguez," Thompson said, "we've been wondering when you would call. Your uncle spoke of you often. How much have you discovered?" "Everything, I think," Marcus replied. "The counterfeiting equipment, the North Wind materials, and the financial assets." "And what do you intend to do with this information?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I want to continue the family tradition. I want to serve my country." There was a long pause before Thompson responded. "That's not a decision to make lightly, Mr. Rodriguez. The work your uncle did required enormous personal sacrifice. Are you prepared for that?" "I've already sacrificed for my country," Marcus said, thinking of the friends he'd lost in Afghanistan and the pieces of himself he'd left in the desert. "The only difference is that this time I'll be serving at home." "Very well. Someone will be in touch within the week. In the meantime, secure everything you've found and trust no one except Scout. Edmund trained that dog well. He'll be an excellent partner for you." The line went dead, and Marcus walked back through the snow to the warehouse where Scout was waiting. Over the next 6 months, Marcus's life changed completely, though anyone observing from the outside would have seen only modest improvements. He used some of Edmund's hidden assets to renovate the warehouse, setting up a legitimate motorcycle repair business that provided perfect cover for his real work. The CIA contact, who turned out to be a woman named Sarah Chen, became his handler. She was a no-nonsense professional who had worked with Edmund during his final years of service, and she helped Marcus understand the scope of his new responsibilities. Marcus's first assignment was to investigate a network of rural businesses that were suspected of laundering money for international drug cartels. Using skills he'd learned in the military and new techniques taught by Sarah, Marcus was able to infiltrate the network and gather enough evidence to shut down a multi-million-dollar operation. But it was Scout who proved to be his most valuable asset. The dog had been trained not just as a companion, but as a working partner, capable of detecting hidden compartments, identifying suspicious individuals, and even carrying out simple surveillance tasks. Edmund spent 5 years training him. Sarah explained during one of their monthly meetings. "Scout isn't just a pet. He's probably the most intelligent and capable canine operative we've ever worked with." Marcus's success on his first assignment led to more complex missions. He investigated foreign intelligence operatives, tracked terrorist financing networks, and helped identify security threats that never made the evening news. The motorcycle repair business flourished, providing both cover and legitimate income. Marcus hired 2 part-time mechanics, both veterans like himself, and the shop became a popular gathering place for local bikers and military veterans. But Marcus's real satisfaction came from knowing that he was continuing Edmund's legacy. In the hidden chambers beneath the warehouse, he maintained files on ongoing operations, updated equipment caches, and prepared for threats that most Americans never knew existed. Scout remained his constant companion, seeming to understand the importance of their work. The dog had an uncanny ability to sense when Marcus was preparing for an operation, becoming more alert and focused. 1 year after inheriting the warehouse, Marcus received a package with no return address. Inside, he found a medal, the Intelligence Star, one of the CIA's highest honors, and a note, awarded posthumously to Edmund Rodriguez for exceptional service to the United States of America, 1978-2000. He would be proud of you. Marcus placed the medal in the small shrine he'd created in Edmund's honor, next to the coffee mug and a photograph of his uncle that Sarah had provided. Scout sat beside him, as if paying his own respects to their shared partner. That evening, as Marcus reviewed intelligence reports in the underground office he'd established, Scout suddenly became alert, ears perked and body tense. The dog moved to the tunnel entrance and growled softly. Marcus immediately went to the perimeter security system he'd installed and saw two figures approaching the warehouse through the darkness. They were moving with the practiced stealth of professionals, and Marcus recognized the tactical formation. These weren't random intruders. Moving quickly and quietly, Marcus armed himself and took a defensive position, while Scout moved to a backup observation post they'd practiced. The dog's military training was evident as he remained silent and alert, ready to respond to Marcus's commands. The intruders spent several minutes attempting to pick the lock on the main entrance before giving up and moving to a side window. Marcus watched their approach through his security cameras, noting their equipment and tactics. These were definitely professionals, possibly foreign operatives. When the first intruder entered the warehouse, Scout was ready. On Marcus's signal, the dog emerged from concealment and took down the intruder with precision, pinning him without causing serious injury. The second intruder rushed to help his partner, but found himself facing Marcus, who had emerged from his own concealment with military efficiency. "Federal agents," Marcus announced, though he was actually operating under CIA authority. "You're trespassing on a classified facility." The two intruders turned out to be Russian intelligence operatives who had been tracking down leads related to Edmund's old operations. They had somehow learned about the warehouse and were attempting to recover intelligence materials they believed might still be valuable. Sarah arrived within hours of Marcus's call, bringing a team of specialists to handle the situation. The Russian operatives were quietly deported, and additional security measures were implemented around the warehouse. "This is exactly why we needed someone to continue Edmund's work," Sarah told Marcus after the incident was resolved. "These threats don't disappear just because the Cold War is over. They evolve, and we need to evolve with them." Marcus nodded, understanding that this was just the beginning. He had inherited more than just property from Edmund. He had inherited a responsibility to protect his country in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged. As the months passed, Marcus's reputation within the intelligence community grew. His military background, combined with Edmund's training materials and Scout's capabilities, made him an exceptionally effective operative. He successfully completed assignments across the Midwest, from investigating terrorist financing in Chicago to tracking weapons smugglers along the Canadian border. The motorcycle repair shop provided perfect cover, as it gave Marcus a reason to travel and meet with a diverse group of people. His customers included everyone from weekend riders to hardened bikers, and many proved to be valuable sources of information about criminal activities in their communities. But it was Scout who often made the difference in Marcus's missions. The dog's ability to detect hidden compartments, identify dangerous individuals, and provide early warning of threats made him an invaluable partner. More than once, Scout's instincts had saved Marcus from walking into dangerous situations. 2 years after discovering the hidden tunnels, Marcus received his most challenging assignment yet. Intelligence sources had identified a terrorist cell operating in the heartland, using rural communities as cover while they planned attacks on major American cities. The cell was sophisticated and well-funded, with connections to international terrorist organizations. Traditional FBI and CIA methods had failed to penetrate their security, and several previous operations had been compromised. "We need someone who can approach this from a different angle," Sarah explained during their briefing. Your cover as a veteran-owned business owner gives you credibility in rural communities that federal agents can't match. Marcus spent weeks preparing for the assignment, studying the target area and developing his cover story. He would pose as a veteran looking to relocate his business to a more rural area, using the motorcycle shop as a reason to scout potential locations. Scout would be essential to the mission, as the terrorist cell was known to use hidden weapons caches and safe houses that would be difficult to locate through traditional surveillance methods. The assignment took Marcus and Scout to a small farming community in Nebraska, where the terrorist cell had reportedly established a base of operations. Marcus rented a small garage and began operating a temporary motorcycle repair service while quietly investigating suspicious activities in the area. It was Scout who first detected the signs of the terrorist operation. During their evening walks around the community, the dog repeatedly showed interest in a particular farm on the outskirts of town. The property appeared to be a normal wheat farm, but Scout's behavior suggested there was more happening there than met the eye. Using surveillance techniques Edmund had documented in his training materials, Marcus was able to confirm that the farm was indeed being used as a terrorist safe house. Hidden cameras revealed individuals arriving and departing at odd hours, and intercepted communications suggested that a major operation was being planned. But the most dangerous discovery came when Scout detected an underground facility beneath one of the farm's outbuildings. Using the same techniques he'd learned while exploring Edmund's hidden chambers, Marcus was able to confirm that the terrorists had established an extensive underground complex, complete with weapons storage, communication equipment, and what appeared to be bomb-making materials. The intelligence Marcus gathered led to a coordinated raid that netted 15 suspected terrorists and prevented what intelligence officials later described as one of the most significant terrorist plots ever attempted on American soil. Marcus's work on the case earned him recognition within the highest levels of the intelligence community, but more importantly, it validated Edmund's belief that America needed guardians willing to work in the shadows to protect national security. As Marcus returned to his warehouse base after the successful operation, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that rainy day when he'd first seen his inheritance. He'd gone from being a struggling veteran to being one of the country's most effective covert operatives. But the real change was deeper than his professional success. Marcus had found his purpose, his place in the world, and his way to honor the sacrifices that had been made for American freedom. Scout seemed to understand the significance of their work as well. The dog had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense threats and opportunities, and his partnership with Marcus had become legendary among intelligence professionals who were cleared to know about their operations. 3 years after inheriting the warehouse, Marcus received a visit from a high-ranking CIA official who had flown in specifically to meet with him. "Mr. Rodriguez," the official said, "your work has been exceptional. The President himself has been briefed on several of your operations, and there's discussion about expanding your mission." Marcus listened as the official outlined a proposal to establish a new program based on the model Edmund had created. The program would recruit and train veterans who could operate independently in communities across America, providing intelligence gathering and threat response capabilities that traditional agencies couldn't match. "We'd like you to head the program," the official explained. "You'd be responsible for identifying and training new operatives, expanding the network Edmund started, and coordinating operations across the country." Marcus looked at Scout, who was sitting attentively beside his chair. The dog's presence reminded him of the legacy he'd inherited and the responsibility he'd accepted. "I'll do it," Marcus said, "but I have some conditions." The negotiations took several weeks, but eventually Marcus had an agreement that would allow him to establish a training facility at the warehouse while maintaining his cover as a motorcycle repair business owner. The CIA would provide funding and resources while allowing Marcus to operate with the independence that had made Edmund's work so successful. Over the following year, Marcus recruited and trained 15 new operatives, all veterans with specialized skills and strong moral character. Each was given cover employment and assigned to a different region of the country, creating a network of guardians who could respond to threats that traditional law enforcement might miss. The program, officially designated as Operation Heartland, became one of the CIA's most successful domestic security initiatives. Marcus's operatives were responsible for preventing dozens of terrorist attacks, breaking up criminal organizations, and gathering intelligence that proved vital to national security. But for Marcus, the most satisfying part of the work was knowing that he was continuing Edmund's mission. Every successful operation, every threat neutralized, was a tribute to the uncle he'd barely known but had come to deeply respect. Scout remained Marcus's primary partner, even as the dog aged and new canine operatives joined the program. The intelligence and skills Edmund had bred and trained into Scout were passed on to a new generation of working dogs, each paired with operatives who understood the value of having a four-legged partner. On the 5th anniversary of discovering the hidden tunnels, Marcus stood in the main warehouse looking at what had become a sophisticated training facility. Veterans from across the country came here to learn the skills they would need to serve their country in a new way, carrying on a tradition of secret service that stretched back to the early days of the Cold War. Scout, now showing his age, but still alert and capable, sat beside Marcus as they watched a new class of trainees practice surveillance techniques. "You know, boy," Marcus said quietly, "I used to think my family didn't care about me. Turns out I was wrong. Uncle Edmund left me the most important inheritance anyone could receive, the chance to make a difference." Scout's tail wagged, and Marcus could have sworn he saw approval in those intelligent brown eyes. As the sun set over the Iowa countryside, casting long shadows across the warehouse floor, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He'd started as a struggling veteran with no clear direction in life, and now he was the head of one of America's most crucial security programs. The family that had once laughed at his inheritance of a rotting warehouse would never know the truth about what Marcus had really received. They would never understand that Edmund's gift had been far more valuable than money or property. It had been the chance to serve his country in the most meaningful way possible. But Marcus didn't need their understanding or approval. He had found his purpose, his family's legacy, and his place in the long tradition of Americans who were willing to sacrifice everything to protect the freedoms that others took for granted. And he had Scout, the loyal partner who had started it all by finding the hidden tunnel that changed everything. As Marcus locked up the warehouse for the night and headed to his comfortable living quarters in the renovated office space, Scout padding beside him, he thought about Edmund's words. "America needs guardians who can work in the shadows." Marcus smiled, knowing that thanks to Operation Heartland, America would always have those guardians, and they would always have the support they needed to keep the country safe. The next morning would bring new challenges, new threats to investigate, and new operatives to train. But tonight, Marcus was content to know that he had honored his family's legacy and found his true calling in life. Scout settled down beside Marcus's bed, still alert even in sleep, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone, a network of protectors who would ensure that America remained safe from those who would do her harm. The warehouse that had once seemed like a burden had become the heart of one of the most important security operations in American history. And it all started with a dog who knew there was something hidden beneath the floor, waiting for the right person to discover it. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, he whispered a quiet thank you to the uncle he'd never really known, but who had given him everything that truly mattered: purpose, mission, and the chance to serve his country with honor. In the end, the family's laughter had been premature. The rotting warehouse had indeed been the inheritance of a lifetime, just not in any way they could have imagined, and somewhere in the darkness of the warehouse, the hidden chambers stood ready for whatever challenges the future might bring, protected by a network of guardians who understood that freedom's price must be paid by those willing to work in the shadows so others could live in the light. Thank you for watching this incredible story unfold. If you were moved by Marcus's journey from struggling veteran to national hero, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more amazing stories like this one. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest content. What did you think about Marcus's decision to continue his family's legacy of service? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to share this story with others who might need to hear about the hidden heroes who protect our freedom every day.